Introduce our presenter for today's training, Stephen Eubanks, PE, PMP, CFM. Stephen is the owner of Stephen Eubanks Engineering since retiring after 19 years at the city of Fort Worth. He held several positions in Fort Worth's stormwater program, including chief stormwater engineer. His responsibilities included new development review, capital project management, flooding and drainage complaint investigations, public-private partnerships, infrastructure criticality assessment, and engineering assistance for maintenance projects. He assisted in the development of the city's stormwater utility and the 2006 Fort Worth Stormwater Waste Management Design Manual, and more recently oversaw development of the city's stormwater master plan. He has spoken at numerous conferences and has developed several workshops and training programs. He was honored by TSPE Fort Worth Chapter as Engineer of the Year in 2016. And now I'd like to ask Stephen to give his presentation on Project Management 101. Stephen?
Well, I have to unmute first. There we go. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be back with you today. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about what project management is. So let's start out. Let's meet, okay, I gotta get my buttons working right. Let's meet Joe. Joe was a good student in college. He started out as a graduate engineer at a consulting firm. He worked on design on numerous projects. He recently obtained his PE license and he's been promoted to project manager and given his first project. But the survey is overdue according to the project schedule. His co-workers are grumbling because of his lack of leadership. The client is upset that the project is behind, and accounting is upset that the project is already over budget. What happened? Well, project management is work that many engineers spend a majority of their career doing. But aside from a session or two in senior design class, it is not a part of formal engineering education. Most companies don't provide formal training in project management, and it's a skill mostly caught from a supervisor or peer, provided they are willing and have the time to explain to you all the tasks that they are managing. And it's not generally that they're not willing, it's just that there's a lot of different tasks, and it's hard to go into somebody and say, oh, Joe, I just called the surveyor to see if the survey is going to be coming in next week like it's supposed to. Joe, I just talked to Mrs. Smith, who lives right next door to the project, and tried to assuage her fears. There's just so much going on that a lot of times, you know, even if you're working closely with the project manager, you don't pick up on everything that the project manager is responsible for. So is there any surprise that most engineers have poor project management skills? So let's start with some definitions. What is a project? We want to be clear what actually a project is. It's a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. It's temporary in that it has a defined beginning and end in time, and therefore defined scope and resources. It's unique in that it is not a routine operation, but a specific set of operations designed to accomplish a singular goal, and the result is a completed product, service, or result. So let's look at some examples of projects. Mowing the yard. Well, some of y'all say, well, y'all mow the yard all the time, so that's not really a project. But if you do it like I do it, you know, you kind of, you see the grass growing, you wait for the weather to be nice. Finally, I go out, I pull up all the water hoses across the yard. I pick up all the leaves or the branches that are broken off, any trash that's blown in the yard, get the yard cleaned. I get out the edger, I edge along the edge of the house, the edge of the sidewalk, edge of the driveway. Then I get out the mower, make sure I've got gasoline in it, get it all started, get everything all mowed, and then come back and sweep up all the grass that's blown on the sidewalk and on the driveway. And so by the end of the day, I have a pretty good looking lawn, and with all the pieces and parts, that is a project. Now, contract negotiations. You know, you do a lot of contract negotiations and engineering work, but at the end of the day, your goal, your result is having a signed engineering contract. So yes, that is a project. Reviewing timesheets, it's something you do all the time. Not really any specific outcome in terms of a result that you're aiming for. So that's really not a project, that's just a routine operation. Again, organizing a toolbox, at the end of the day, however complicated it is, you have an organized toolbox where you can find your tools. So yes, that is a project. Weekly staff meetings, most people don't even know the purpose of those. Certainly not any results that come out of them that are positive. So no, that's not a project. And teaching a webinar. You know, I put together previous lessons I've done. I look up some other resources. I work on the PowerPoint. I practice the PowerPoint and revise it. Finally get it ready and come along and teach it today. And yes, this will be a completed project. So these are examples of projects. Now let's look at the definition of what is project management. It's the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities in order to deliver the project successfully. It has always been practiced informally since the time of the pyramids. But it became a distinct profession in the mid-20th century, and it has been formalized by a professional society, the Project Management Institute, which provides training, certifications, standards, and resources for project managers. Probably the most well-known of these resources is a guide to the project management body of knowledge. It's currently in the 6th edition. It's about a 750-page guide. It is not the body of knowledge. The body of knowledge is thousands upon thousands of publications of so many different aspects of leadership, team building, and other aspects of project management. So why is project management important? Well, a successful project requires more than a good set of plans. Other important aspects include leading the design team and managing outsourced work, managing the project budget, schedule, and resource needs, evaluating and addressing utility conflicts and applicable permit requirements, identifying and acquiring easements or right-of-way, managing project changes and scope creep, and delivering an affordable project that satisfies clients and other stakeholders. So if you were with me in August when I was talking about urban flooding, one of the things I showed was that key goals of a successful project included acceptability, affordability, and effectiveness. Now, in this little example here, effectiveness is something that the lead design engineer can do, but the real work of the project manager is in acceptability and affordability. Now, it's a whole lot bigger picture than that. There's a whole lot more to it than that. But the point is that the project manager has to look at the big picture and has to look beyond just having a good set of plans or having an effective design. You got to make sure that all of the stakeholders are satisfied, all of the project goals are met, the budget is being adhered to, the schedule is being adhered to, quality is there, risks are being addressed, so many other things that the project manager works on. So let's look a little bit now at what the 5 phases of a project are. According to the project management book of body of knowledge, or the guide, I'll call it the PMBOK guide. It's initiating, planning, execution, monitoring and controlling, and closing. And initiation and planning are actually 2 separate phases, and execution and monitoring and controlling both go on simultaneously, but they're 2 distinct project efforts. So we also have, from the PMBOK guide, 10 knowledge areas. I talked about a little bit of these a minute ago, but project integration management is basically making sure all the pieces and parts of the project come together. You have scope management, keep your project goal and what you're actually working on identified. You've got schedule management, cost management, quality management, resource management, which is typically the human resources, your design team, plus whatever tools they may need. You have communication management, risk management, procurement management. Say you need survey, geotech, environmental studies done, that kind of thing. And then, or if you're on the city side of things, procurement is to get the consultant on board and to get the contractor on board. Then stakeholder management, all the different stakeholders involved in the project, oftentimes far more than the client. You might have neighbors, you might have, in some issues, you might have council members involved, you might have other agencies involved, anybody who's giving you a permit, anyone like that. But there's lots of stakeholders, including other people at the company are stakeholders as well as your design team and many people who have a stake in how the project succeeds. So we put it all together and we come up with 49 management processes. 6th edition of the PMBOK has these 49 processes. We're not going to talk about all of these today. I will tell you that all the numbers in brackets, and then the all the 4.1 and so on, that all relates to chapters in the PMBOK guide. It starts in chapter 4, goes through chapter 13, talking about each of the knowledge areas. The ones I am going to point out is that you notice under planning, almost half the activities occur in the planning stage, which means if you're jump right into executing your project and you don't plan it out right, you're likely to have a lot of problems as the project goes down the line. The other thing to note is that monitoring and controlling, every knowledge area has at least one activity or one management process under monitoring and controlling. What can be controlled can be controlled. What can't be controlled can be monitored. But you need to, every aspect of your project, you need to have monitored. And then there are also in the PMBOK guide individual plans and documents that are recommended for complex projects. You see you can have scope management plan, requirements management plan, schedule management plan. Not all of these are necessary, but as you get into more complex projects, you need to have more things that you can track and manage so that you can make sure that everything is staying on track. There's lots of project documents. One of the first projects I got was that was kind of really out of my realm of experience, was a GIS mapping project for the city. One of the first meetings we had, somebody from IT, IT folks are really trained in business, a lot of business processes. She said, well, you need to have a decision log. Well, I didn't even know what a decision log was at that point, but you see in all the project documents, notice that decision log and then another one, project charter, aren't even listed here. So there may be many, many types of documents that you need to manage depending on how complex your project is. Now there are other, then this is a little process map that I used to study for the project management professional exam. It does, it puts together all the different knowledge areas, all the different activities, all the different phases. And you'd see it can be rather complex, but if you're trying to do anything other than a really simple project, you need to make sure you understand all the different things that you need to be responsible for tracking. Now, this was the 5th edition, and if you counted it up, you'll see there's only 47 activities or management processes. that end up going from the 6th edition. They took out a couple, they added a few, and now there's 49. But effectively, they're the same. They're just different emphases in those. Now, there are other project management methodologies. Some of them are simpler. I ran into this one, the SQUIRT project management model. It stands for scope, quality, effort, risk, and time. And those are certainly 5 important areas of focus for every project manager. But of course, as the project starts moving and all of those focus areas start kind of blending together in a little vortex. And of course, what do you have in the eye of the hurricane? You have the unfazed project manager calmly managing all these different aspects as they whirl around in a blender. Well, at least if you're supposed to be the project manager in the eye of the hurricane where it's calm. So how do you become a successful project manager? When I first taught this, I came up with the first 3 points, and as I was working on this, I decided to add the 4th one, and we'll look at these. We're going to look at them here then in more detail, but you've got to manage progress. No matter what problems may arise in your project, you must always keep the project moving forward. When I was working at the city, we ran into so many roadblocks. We were handling a lot of the behind the scenes stuff the consultant didn't see in terms of some of the permitting, some of the easements, some of the funding issues. We had council members getting involved. We had citizens involved. We had to address all of these concerns. We had other departments to coordinate with. And you can end up getting caught up in a lot of different activities, but your focus has always got to be on keeping the project moving forward. You're the only one that maybe, in what you're dealing with, you may be the only one that cares that the project moves forward. And so it's up to you to make sure, no matter what accounting says, no matter what else, what other things you run into, you've got to keep your project moving forward because you're the one responsible for getting it executed. You also have to manage people. All project work is performed by people, team members, contractors, subcontractors, government reviewers, clients, other stakeholders. You have to manage risk. You've got to understand what can sidetrack your project, increase costs or create delays. And you want to identify and manage risk early and always focus on them. And then the one I've added for this presentation is you want to manage yourself. You don't want to do all the work yourself. It's a little more than that, but you really want to learn to depend on your team. Now let's look at these a little bit more in detail. Project managers can become sidetracked with managing details and processes that don't move the project along. I was just mentioning this. When I was at the city, it seems like the folks in finance didn't really care if we got a project done or not. All they cared about was that everything was properly financially tracked. That may or may not necessarily have been the case, but sometimes it felt like everybody was throwing a roadblock in front of our projects. And you as a project manager have to, keep the project moving along. There's a lot of tools that you might need to use for tracking that other people need for tracking your project, but really the tools you need should only be what's beneficial to help with keeping the project on track. Now, that does include some financial tools and things like that. For example, not only did I have to keep track of my project or projects when I was at the city, but our program manager had to keep track of all 30 projects that were going on at any one time, and how much money was in the budget for each one, and which of them might need more budget, which of them were going to have excess funds. So there were some financial tracking that I had to do that wasn't necessarily directly beneficial for moving my project along, but it was for moving the whole program along. But Ken Lawrence at IT Nexus calls this attitude project execution. And one of the illustrations I can think of is you can shuffle cards all day. You can arrange them by suit. You can arrange them by number. You can arrange them by number and by suit. You can reshuffle them. You can, but until you actually deal the cards out, that is really when you're executing the projects. So don't get hung up in doing all this administrative work without focusing on the fact that you've got to get the project out the door. Second, you want to learn to manage people. It's understanding team dynamics. You don't want to become we'll talk about that here in just a minute. You don't want to become a control freak. You want to give others freedom to take ownership and develop solutions their own way. The first time you're a project manager and you have a project team, their goal is not to be extra hands for you and do everything your way, but their goal is to do the things that they know how to do their way and in a way that gives you what you need. And one of the things I've noticed especially from younger project managers is trying to get that balance where you actually let go of some of the details and you let other people handle some of the details that you used to handle yourself. And maybe they do it a little bit different way from you, but that's okay. In managing people, you have to develop professional soft skills to go along with your technical hard skills. And I've noticed in the last few years that there's been a movement toward a collaborative efforts among teams and not just individual efforts. Back in the old days, the team might meet and everybody's given a different task and everybody goes and does their own thing and they come back together, and that's when it all gets put together. But now I've noticed that the younger, and I hesitate to label folks, but I will say maybe the millennials tend to be more collaborative, work together in teams. It might not look as efficient, but I believe that there's better ownership for the whole project, and folks have a better perspective. And I know that throughout a project, I always worked better if I knew where my work fit into the overall project, so that way I could make sure that my work didn't just meet the assigned goals that I had, but I had the bigger picture in mind. So being able to work among teams is really more important. So now let's look at some of the issues of team dynamics. Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. The functional team is based on trust, starting at the bottom, trust, healthy conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. But in the 5 dysfunctions of a team, he talks about, let's just say we have a building project. And the mechanical engineer doesn't trust the electrical engineer because he never tells him what kind of power he's going to deliver him. Well, the electrical engineer doesn't trust the mechanical engineer because he's always changing the power requirements on the equipment. But neither one of them trusts the structural engineer because every time he revises his design, the columns and girders move and they have to start their layouts all over again. But does anybody talk about all these problems? No, we all meet together as a team and everybody is, oh yeah, we get along. Nobody wants to be looked at as a bad guy, as a fighter. So, when it comes down to it, something comes up, we need it resolved. Well, I tell you what, let your people get together with my people and maybe they can figure out something. But nobody's really expecting, things to succeed. The standards are low. And, at the end of the day, the project fails, no results, but hey, I've got somebody to blame. So I've protected, myself, I protected my team. And this kind of repeated team dynamic is actually very, very widespread. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, yeah, that's how my team works. Yeah, that's how my team works. Well, so this is one of the, in his book, he talks about how you have to have healthy conflict in order to work through some of the issues so that you can actually have commitment and accountability and then results. Now, let's look at team dynamics as it relates to a project. In the mid-60s, Bruce Tuckman developed the stages of team development called forming, storming, norming, and performing. The forming stage, everybody's excited about a new project, but everybody's got all sorts of different goals and wishes and experience they're bringing to the line, and nobody's really focused. So your skill level at working on your project and working as a team is fairly low. Well, then, as the project gets a little further along, people start lining up, but unfortunately, they start lining up at odds to each other. One group decides, well, they're all on one page heading one way, and another group is on another side heading another way, and enthusiasm really plummets. People are starting to at least line up together, so the skill set's improving. But then as the team starts norming, people are coming around, aiming more toward the goal, enthusiasm starts to rise, skill level increases, and finally a high-performing team is working as one with high skill level and high enthusiasm. So there's been a lot of information written about team dynamics. We're not going to go through all of that today. This will all be in the handout available afterwards. But I wanted to point out a few things. First of all, in the forming stage, there's uncertainty about roles and looking outside for guidance. In the storming stage, the team members resist the task demands. They want to do it their way. They want to head a different direction. And the norming, the team starts to set up procedures to deal with the task. And then finally, in the performing stage, the people share a common focus, communicate effectively, and become more efficient and flexible as a result. So it's all a continuous process as a team develops. Well, there's different leadership styles for these different kinds of stages. And this is one I picked up in scouting. It's called the EDGE method for explain, demonstrate, guide, and enable. So in the forming stage, the leader is doing more explanation. This is what we're doing. When the storming happens, the leader has to be careful not to become part of the storming himself or herself. And the leader has to start showing, demonstrating what kind of behavior is expected, what kind of work is expected, and toward the goals. As the team is norming, the leader moves over to more toward a guiding stage, and as the team becomes high performing, the leader can actually enables the group to work on its own and stand outside, and it really encourages the team to grow. So now, back to the third aspect of managing projects for success is managing risk. You have to think through what your assumptions are. You have to, identify really what could go wrong with what your assumptions are. Are you assuming that this right away can be done okay? If you've got to move a 21-inch water line, you've got to assume, you make assumptions. Well, we'll just shut that down and do it. Well, maybe in the summertime, you can't shut down a 21-inch water line because there's too much water demand. So there's things that you need to think through what your assumptions are and what could go wrong. You can't ignore the big unknowns and just hope for the best. Talk to mentors and experts, including your contractors, for possible solutions to issues which arise. I don't know how many times I dealt with an issue out in the field when I worked for the city. And, the contractor, when the contractor would bring up an issue, 9 times out of 10, he had already figured out a workaround. And almost all the time, his workaround for addressing the problem ended up being the best thing to do. So successful contractors are really good problem solvers. And since there's so many unforeseen or unknown site conditions, I say unforeseen, but sometimes they're foreseeable. That's one of the big risks is if you say, well, we didn't know that gas line was there. Well, did you do a utility, subsurface utility engineering in order to find out whether there was one there or not? So again, that's part of managing risk. And then realize that changes in scope or getting behind in budget or schedule often lead to being a lot more rushed, so you have a lot less attention to detail. And it results in a greater risk for overlooking critical issues. And remember that if you don't have time to do it right the first time, you're going to find a whole lot more time to do it right the second time. But that doesn't make you any money and doesn't score you any points. So it's no matter what your goals or deadlines are, you've got to be paying attention to risk and focusing on managing all these critical issues. And then finally, you need to manage yourself. Except for small projects, you cannot be a successful project manager if you're also the lead design engineer. We had this happen on a project, and it really led to overlooking major conflicts and deficiencies. The landscape architect was tasked with putting as many different trees on the site, the project site. It was a big detention basin that he could to take care of the mitigation for tearing down the trees. So somewhere down the line in one of our review meetings, we asked for them, the consultant to regrade a certain area to make it an unpaved access road. We didn't really call it a road. We didn't, it was just going to drive across the grass, but we needed a flat area. And the landscape architect got the revisions to the grading plan, and now he had a nice big long flat area for planting trees. And so the next review meeting, then we had a nice line of about 20 trees right down the middle of what was going to be our access road, because there was not enough internal communication. Don't mean to pick on this landscape architect because he was just doing his job, but the second major deficiency was, he had all this landscaping to do, and so he designed a sprinkler system. Everybody agreed to that. Everybody wanted it. But the project manager never really got to comparing things. And when the contractor installed the sprinkler system, he went to hook it up and there was no power in the area. Well, unfortunately, all the trees were planted, all the vegetation was planted. It was right in the late spring. It was really going to be a good time for everything to grow over the summer, but there was no water. And unfortunately, it was a long, dry summer. The consultant took it all back, got his electrical engineer on it, found the power, got the power on the poles, got the permitting, got the meter service and everything. But by the time the electrical service could be made available for the sprinkler system, all of the vegetation had died. It looked like an eyesore. There were a lot of upset stakeholders for how ugly the project looked. The only thing that grew on that project, unfortunately, was the Johnson grass, because the contractor had been all shut down waiting to get this issue resolved. So those are the kinds of projects, conflicts and deficiencies. If you're trying to do it all yourself, you're not going to manage. And then finally, I've said this before with managing a team, you don't want to insist that every step of the project be done your way. As long as the project meets requirements, don't micromanage. And I'm saying this for your sake as well as for the team. Because you, as a project manager, only have so much energy. Yeah, you might work 60-hour weeks, but after a while, you've got diminishing efficiency. You've only got so much energy to put in. Everybody needs downtime to come back and look at things. And I got this illustration also from Ken Lawrence about this is under his, he called this energy management, because really to be a successful project manager, you've got to know how to manage your energy. And, you know, micromanaging particular issues is not really the best focus for a project manager's own energy management. In this particular case, he and I were working together on it, and I introduced him to the concept of VUCA that I'd run into, and he said, yes, this describes what I'm looking for. So VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the best way to put all that in perspective is to say 60 years ago, projects were a lot simpler. You know, they had very clearly defined objectives. They were simpler. The goal line never moved or rarely moved. But today we've got so many more different issues we're dealing with. We've got volatility on you know, what regulation may apply, what the stakeholder wants. We've got volatility on you know, maybe how the budget works or whatever. There's a lot more uncertainty in our projects. You know, there's things that so many more factors to keep aware of, become more complex, and in some cases, you know, ambiguous. You know, most of the time I've dealt with regulations. The regulations say one thing, the people managing the permits say something slightly different. So it's ambiguous, you know, really what's expected. And so going over here to the illustration now, you know, Ken was saying that that for all of the work that you do, you spend a lot of time down in the weeds. But as project manager, you need to come up periodically. More so because you're project manager, you need to get some kind of perspective on where you're going. Is the project still on track, or is it off track? You can spend all your time in the weeds as a project manager and find out when you get down toward the end that you've completely overlooked something that was really, really important. Whether it be like, oh, you wanted us to get that easement? Oh, well, if we'd started 7 months ago, we'd have that easement now. But I guess now the project's going to be delayed 7 months. So there's different things like that that the project manager has to be aware of. And so he needs to periodically, from time to time, make sure he's stepping back and looking at the big picture. I want to look at now getting close to, you know, looking at some of the top 10 reasons that projects fail as we're starting to wrap this up. One of the ones I've seen most off is changes in key personnel, inadequately trained or inexperienced project managers like poor Joe over here. The project managers and or key designers don't visit the project site to understand the setting and check details not shown on the survey. You say, hey, hold it. That's an engineering due diligence issue. That's not a project management issue. I said, well, I don't disagree with that, but I will tell you that I have seen more projects fail. That's probably number 3 on my list of why projects fail, especially with civil engineering projects. So even though it doesn't quite fit under the project management failure side, it does fit under the engineering due diligence failure side, and it's moved way up the list. You've got poor leadership at any and all levels. You've got an inattention to client needs and expectations with a false understanding of project requirements. Or maybe to put it in the words of Alan Greenspan, I know you think you understand what you thought I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. And then this little cartoon that I first ran into 40 years ago, talking about various ways of communication, and everybody's got their own little way of thinking through things. And at the end of the day, what you end up with is something that's utterly a failure when what what was really wanted in communication, that the client really wanted, but didn't maybe express himself well, and the project manager didn't track down to find out what that was, ended up being something completely different. So again, you've got to make sure you've got a meeting of the minds with your scope and expectations. Other reasons project fail is there's a failure to set and manage expectations, failure to adequately identify, understand, document, and track requirements. I mentioned that a while ago. Oh, you wanted that easement surveyed. Well, yeah, we were supposed to do that 7 months ago. Poor planning or estimation of level of effort required. At the city, I ran into that an awful lot. Typically, the people that were responsible for doing bond issues, putting bond issues together, they always seem to lowball the projects, because if you had $150 million to spend and you could do 45 projects, if you could tell council that you could do 45 projects instead of 35 projects, then the council was a lot happier. And as soon as the project manager got their project, it was like they were already, everybody had already underguessed how much it would cost, how much level of effort. Oh yeah, we can get this out in a year. Well, sometimes you just can't do that if you still got to go through, consultant selection, negotiations, and all this stuff. The consultant might only have 6 months left to do design, and there might be a lot of issues that still have to happen. So those are all things that you've got to understand level of effort. Again, poor risk assessment or attention to risk, and inadequate communication. So what will make Joe happy? I've got a few tools and tips for project management. There's certainly many, many more, but I'll just touch on these as we wrap up today. We want to keep a running task list sorted by importance. I want to look at project progress boards or Kanban boards. We've got to focus on finishing, and we need to look at what our resources are. So there's a task list. Everybody's got task lists on their computer, but what you want to do is you want to prioritize it. You want to update it frequently. You want to work on the most critical first. You want to be specific about purpose. As shown in the little box, you don't want to just work on something. You want to talk about a milestone or a finished task. And I would recommend that you print it and mark items off. I know you keep it on the computer. I know you can delete them, mark them off, but at the end of the week, if you've done 7 major tasks, but you've added 9 tasks, at the end of the week, your task list is longer than it was before. But if you printed it out and you've X'd it out, you might find out that there was one of your critical project items that you didn't get to. That was maybe 7th or 8th on your list, but it's the one you didn't get to. So you want to make sure that that's number 1 at the beginning of next week. The other thing about having a printed list in front of you is every once in a while you have one of your critical items maybe only takes 15 minutes. It's just something you really don't necessarily want to do. But by having that list printed in front of you, you get to a stopping point and it's like, oh, it's 2:30, I have a meeting at 3. Well, here's a couple of real small, quick items I can get done. Check them off the list before I go to my 3 o'clock meeting. So having those printed out and in front of you kind of keeps a reminder of what things you need to work on. Kanban board, it shows project progress. You can easily see issues, and these kind of boards are good for weekly stand-up status meetings. This is one we had when I worked at the city. We had our projects listed down the left side. The different project managers' names are highlighted in different color. All the activities, and we kind of call these the deal breaker activities. it's not something routine, but it's something that we always, we had to either get checked off or we could run into a problem with. So the ones that are blue squares are completed. If they're turned into a diamond shape, it means it did not apply on that project. The yellow ones are the activities in progress. Now, this was not an up-to-date board because it hadn't been updated since the COVID began. But what they did was, for issues that came up that needed some attention, they got orange stickers. And anything that came up that had to be bumped up for, it was more than the project manager. It needed somebody in higher authority to deal with, got a pink sticker. For example, if you're in a big company, you're working on a project and your structural engineer gets reassigned by his boss to another project, and you still need some structural engineering done, well, then you have to, kick it up to your manager as project manager. So that would be a pink sticker, because that's something that kicks up to the program manager, or like in a municipality, it might kick up to an assistant director or some person at that level to deal with, or a director to deal with something in another department. And then finally, we want to focus on finishing. Like football, the project must cross the goal line. Many folks get stuck in the red zone. You want to focus. You've got to focus on finishing, not on the process. And I will tell you that, like my first project I was going to seal, I might have spent as much time doing QA/QC as I spent doing the design, because I just wanted everything to be perfect. And you just got to know when to let go. You don't want to keep running, as they call in football, east and west across the field. You want to go make sure you're heading north or south toward the goal line. And then finally, some of your resources. These are some books I've run into by Patrick Lencioni. Most of these are business fables that describe, tells a little story about what he's dealing with. But Lencioni's real emphasis is in the book The Advantage. It's why organizational health trumps everything else in business. And The Advantage kind of sums up the lessons of these other books. And it's, everybody always wants the biggest, the brightest, the best. But if you don't have a good, solid, healthy organization, you're gonna fail. And it's, like we talked about with the dysfunctional teams, it's not the biggest and brightest that succeed. It's the folks that, work best together, and it's not just it doesn't just happen by itself. You've got to have an organization that's focused on a good, healthy environment. Other resources include the Project Management Institute. To take the Project Management Professional Certification, it'd be on the right box, the 4-year degree. You basically have to have 4,500 hours spent on project management. You have to do kind of an experience record with that. And then there's a week-long course, 35-hour course, and a 4-hour PMP exam with 60 continuing education hours every 3 years. Many, many more resources, but just touched on a few of them. And with that, I am going to open the field for questions.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I've got a comment and a question for you. You showed a field, football field there with the goal, and it reminded me of a project that a young project manager was doing. And I had met with him when I was doing a review one month, and he said he was essentially finished with the project. And I came back next month and he was still working on it and spent a lot more money. And I asked what he'd been doing, and he said, well, I've been making the project better and better. And I said, well, how much did that cost you? And he told me, and I said, well, how much did you save the client? And he told me, and I said, wow, that wasn't a very good investment, was it? So, you know, our project managers, are they striving for perfection? Are they striving to meet the scope? How do you see that?
Well, when it was the first time I put a seal on a project, I was striving for perfection. But obviously, as you go further down the line, you realize there's no perfect set of plans. You want to make sure that you don't have any glaring deficiencies. You've addressed everything. It's it's really understanding what due diligence is, and over due diligence. It's one thing to be diligent. It's another thing to, you certainly don't want to overlook stuff, but it's another thing some people are just afraid to let go. And it's really an important lesson that you've got to learn. Toward the end of my career, man, I was getting stuff out left and right. Of course, I was even still doing some design myself on a couple situations. But it's really a matter of having confidence. And it's also a matter of understanding, getting some field experience. If you've never been to a construction site or construction project itself, seen a lot of construction going on, the plans, they start becoming, an end in themselves. And you've really got to understand that plans are nothing more than a tool for the contractor. And as long as you've addressed everything, so you don't have any real glaring deficiencies or anything, there's still going to be some stuff that they run into out there. And as you do more and more projects, you kind of become and get more and more field experience. You kind of get a little bit more comfortable with what level is really needed to let stuff go. So maybe my recommendation would be, a project manager like that, he needs to go out in the field and see what real construction looks like. I've seen people do concrete design, and then when they see how the guys actually pour concrete in the field, they have conniptions. Because it's like, no, there's only 1.5 inches of cover on that steel, and there's supposed to be 2.5 inches. When you've got 1-inch rebar and a whole web of them tied together, and you're pouring a great old big slab, picking up that steel and moving it 1/2 inch is really going to be really a challenge. But you've got to understand what factor of safety is and things like that.
Yeah.
Anything else?
You're talking about the standard of care, which is so important. The responsibility we have as professional engineers to apply a standard of care to the work we do, to have adequately investigated the given conditions and the requirements of the scope and perform in accordance. There are a few other questions on the question and answer. The first one there says, do you have an example of a smaller project that you've managed with the principles applied that you just talked about?
Well, I'm going to say the beginning of my career, I spent 15 years in consulting engineering, and I certainly didn't know all these lessons at that time. I do remember that I had some small sewer projects, maybe, a couple thousand feet of sewer, those kinds of things that I could do the design and I could manage everything. It was fairly straightforward. I didn't have a lot of moving pieces and parts. It was all within the pavement. There were no easements required. But certain things like that is in the level of what a project manager can do. And as you get more experience as a project manager or as an engineer, you can maybe carry on a little bit more design engineering as well. If you're doing a unique project, a design you've never done before, you certainly can't do project management work and design engineering at the same time. If it's something that you've designed sewer lines or sewer mains, all of your career for 30 years, you can handle a bigger project as project manager as well as lead designer, because it doesn't take near as much effort for the design because you've done it so often, you immediately know what to go for.
All right,
So,
another question. How do you address a client who is not very clear on their desired product or outcome of the project and miscommunication issues?
you ask questions. I know people, I've dealt with people in my career that just don't like asking questions. Well, you look dumb if you ask questions. But actually, the more questions you ask, the more opportunity you have to look smarter. And sometimes it may take 2 hours or 3 hours of sitting down and just asking questions. I had a boss one time that he was very unclear about stuff, and I would continue asking questions. Well, it would frustrate him, but by the end of the session, I knew exactly what he wanted, and I didn't have to go back and do a lot of rerun, or repeat, or rework because I missed something. So it's like part of project planning. You have got to get your scope nailed down. You know, some organizations actually have signed project charters. So if the guy says that's not what I wanted, you go back and say, here it is in writing. This is what you said you wanted. This is what we agreed to do. If you want something else, we have to get paid for it. But it's, you know, that's only successful if you have exhausted, you know, worked exhaustively to make sure that there's a meeting of the minds for understanding project scope.
And one final question. How do you handle a situation where the contractor does work that doesn't follow the set of the plan set, where the work is acceptable but still wrong? Should he redo it? Should you get the client to accept it?
It depends.
What?
It depends on if it meets the functionality of the project. You know, if you know, if the standard of right and wrong is whether it works or whether you obeyed the drawing I had, that's two different things. I've known engineers who insisted that the contractor build it their way, but the contractor knew better, that if he built it the way the plans showed exactly, there was going to be some problems. Sometimes you have contractors that are sloppy, but you really have to use functionality. If you know, if he's trying to drain a storm drain uphill or a sewer uphill, that's a functional problem. If he puts it at 1.5% slope instead of 1% slope, and he gets down, but he gets down to the bottom, he can make up that grade without, you know, having any hydraulic issues, then functionally it still works. So you've really got to decide, you know, whether it's functional the way it's done or whether it actually meets, you know, if your standard is the letter of the plan. Because I would not necessarily want to always build a plan the way I had drawn something when I saw the real field conditions.
Yes, it makes it a lot easier if it's a water line and it's not right in profile versus a sewer line.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your excellent presentation today, Stephen.
All right, and Bob, I do want to give one little plug that I am certainly developing some 1- and 2-day seminars. If a chapter wants to get a group together and get some more extensive training, I'd certainly be happy to talk to them and get something like that together for them.
Well, thank you for that offer. And thank you all for participating. I'm going to ask Mike if he can put up on the screen the ad for CCON 2020. And just like to make sure you're all aware of that virtual opportunity going to be November 4th to 6th. And really would appreciate your going to that site, checking it out, going to CCON 2020 and seeing that program. Lots of PDHs and lots of interesting presentations and topics that'll be virtually over a 3-day period. I want to thank you all for participating today. As Mike mentioned earlier, all registrants will receive an attendance acknowledgement without any further action. And again, for those in a group,